Hi everyone. Well, we're in the middle of our third module, and that also means that we're halfway through the course. So let's take a look at some of the things that we're talking about and reading about in this particular module of BA 411. As we move forward, one of the things that we have been dialoguing about online is the examination of various ethical dilemmas and how we work through them. This is also influenced by our ethical behavior, and your text puts forward a model by James Rest called the four-component model, and helping us decipher how we actually approach these ethical problems. The first aspect of it starts with actually recognizing the problem, and we discussed that somewhat in the online dialogue about the British-Saudi Arabian joint venture. And the impact of recognition is important because if it has great moral intensity, then we're likely to recognize it as having greater importance and giving it more attention. We move on then to determining what really is the right or wrong issue here, or whether or not we're looking at right versus right issues. And how we approach this has a lot to do with our own personal moral development. And Lawrence Kohlberg has established these stages that are very accepted in our field, and I would encourage you to take a look at them. You will probably run across them in some of your other classes as well. Along with that, we also have other things about our personalities and our humanness that get in the way, like greed and ego. And then that leads us to really what is the motivation involved. And our motivation level is influenced by our environment, how we are rewarded, the emotions at play, whether or not we have moods that affect the way we view the world around us, and also how we struggle with our own value system. And that leads us to finally the issue of moral character. And we want to build stronger moral character because it will help us in this process. Things that we know have an influence here are confidence in our ability, an internal versus an external locus of control. And if you aren't sure what that is, please do look that up in your book. I talk about internal and external locus of control in almost every class that I teach. So it's an important aspect here in ethics. And also a belief that your actions will make a difference and that they will have impact. In organizations, we're faced with these types of dilemmas more often than we would like. We make decisions all day long. It's what we do in management. There are some decision-making models that ethicists have put forward that can help us in these trickier situations where there are intense ethical dilemmas at play. One of those is authored by Kidder, and you'll see on your screen that he has a fairly specific 9-step process to go through. And using something like this helps us stay focused on the issue at hand and not just jump to our first emotional viewpoint or stance. Another couple, one is authored by Lynn Payne, and she calls it her moral compass. And it has many of the same steps in it that you would see in Kidder's model, but she's grouped them into 4 primary areas. Your author, Craig Johnson, has developed a model called the 5 I's because he's named each area a word that starts with the letter I. And again, it is another similar model. I think that the importance here is, instead of just running to various emotional places when we're faced with these very overwhelming dilemmas, that we invoke one of these models. And you could certainly make up one of your own that works best for you. And as we're making these decisions, it's clear that we are heavily influenced by both our emotions and our moods. And I put a couple of definitions up here just to keep us on the same page so that we understand the difference. Emotions are more short-term, more intense, Moods are longer term, a little bit lower intensity, etc. And as a tool for those of us who manage and actually just work in any kind of organizational setting, emotional intelligence is a really effective tool to have and to work on developing. You'll see the definition here on the screen. It's about our ability to work together with others in a social setting and be aware of their reactions, their emotions, our own emotions, and how those all interplay, and then how to manage those. And you can see here we have the steps that start at the bottom, where we first have to know ourselves, and then we can begin to manage our own emotions, which we need to do before we can enter into any kind of social setting, and become aware of others' emotions, and then begin to manage that relationship of how we interact with their emotions and how we can affect their emotional responses. The good news is we can improve our emotional intelligence over time. It's something we learn and can practice, so that's a really good thing. It's again, if you are unfamiliar with it, I would highly recommend spending a little bit of time to get to know more about it. We're also going to talk a little bit about power as we go forward in this module and even into the next. And I placed a general definition up here. Power is really about influencing others. And it does have a strong ethical component because we're trying to alter someone's attitude or behavior, which carries with it a great responsibility. So the ethical piece comes into our motivation for doing so. Is our motivation for our own self well-being or greed, or is it because we want to further the community, or is it for the benefit of others? And how we use this power has a lot to do with our ethical viewpoint. So there are many kinds of power that we see in organizations. You've probably heard of this list or a similar list in your other courses. Legitimate power comes from the position that we hold, our authority. We also have the ability to reward or to discipline. Experts have influence because we want the knowledge that they have. And also, we hold certain people in very high esteem, and we aspire to be like them. And those are more reflective of the last two that you see on your screen. This whole concept of ethics in organizations and business is reflected in a TED Talk that I have put an active link on this slide for you. I hope that you will all view this. Damon Horowitz is from Silicon Valley, and he does a great job of talking about technology and the rapid pace of new inventions, and what does this mean for the ethical landscape, not just in our organizations, but for society as a whole. I think you'll find that his approach kind of captures our bumbling along and our struggle with ethics, and it's also somewhat entertaining, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. In our process of influencing others, in whether it's an organization, a small group, a volunteer group, we do it in a variety of ways. There are some positive and negative ways in which we influence people. Excuse me, listed on your screen. You'll see that impression management is listed first, and that can be a good or a positive or a negative. For instance, we all have heard the expression about making a good first impression, putting our best foot forward. We want our boss to perceive us in a positive light, as well as our coworkers. If we use impression management to be deceitful, then that leads us into the next topic, which is deception, which would be a negative process in terms of transparency and honesty, which might be considered unethical. Many of you may be aware of this concept of emotional labor. It's the idea that you, as an employee, are asked to put forward a certain level of behavior, to act in a certain way, to speak in a certain way, even if it goes against your value system. We see this a lot in call centers and any customer service process, where over time employees feel that they are asked to be positive when they feel very negative inside based on a toxic customer. Another aspect of this might be to be asked to sell something that you feel is inappropriate or unethical because your company wants you to push products, even if you don't feel they're good for the customer. So we want to make sure that we communicate our expectations in a transparent way and in an honest manner, and that will help with a lot of these. Another really powerful aspect of communication and of our expectation is the Pygmalion effect. And it refers to this idea that we begin to believe what others say about us. And I think that belief in others is really powerful. If somebody believes that you can do something and they believe it and telegraph it in a strong way, after a period of time you may begin to believe it yourself, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. On the other hand, we can have a negative effect by telegraphing that somebody isn't worthy, they can't perform, they're not up to the task, they're a failure, and that also can become a self-fulfilling prophecy if people begin to believe what they continue hearing. So the other aspect of our module this time, we're going to talk about conflict and negotiation, and we're doing a forum on this right now, and you've been asked to take a short questionnaire and determine your personal conflict style, and then to dialogue a little bit about that and answer some questions. The takeaway from this, I think, is that there's a time and place for almost every one of these styles, and I think it's knowing when and where to use them. For instance, avoiding is not a bad choice if it's a low impact decision and you have no interest in the outcome, but somebody else does. Or again, that was mentioned in the dialogue about violence. If somebody is very violent, you want to avoid conflict because this is not a rational negotiation. Negotiations can take on a positive or a negative process, and a lot has to do with how we choose to engage in those negotiations, but also the concept of distribution of benefits. Distribution of benefits is about a finite pie. If I win, you lose, and vice versa. This is opposed to an integrative approach in which instead of divvying up a finite pie or a finite amount of benefits, we increase the benefits so that we can both increase our benefit and have a win-win situation. An example I sometimes use is, suppose I need $1,000 cash to pay my mortgage or I'm going to lose my house. So I decide to sell my car, I put it on the market for $1,000 because I need $1,000 cash. I have a buyer, he comes in with $900 cash, it's all the cash he has. I need it now, but I need $1,000. So I begin to negotiate, and he only has $1,000 or $900. But he might say to me, why do you need $1,000? And if I were transparent and were to tell him, maybe he would agree that the car is worth it to him. He just doesn't have that much cash. So maybe he has a lawnmower that's worth $200 that he'll throw into the purchase of this car, and that would allow me to sell the lawnmower, and I would end up with more than my $1,000, and we would both be happy. And particularly if this is an item, the lawnmower, that he doesn't need anymore. So there are ways to think outside of a black and white process. We can do this by focusing more on the problem and the motivation behind the actual transaction that we're negotiating, and looking for areas of mutual gain. As employees, an aspect of influence, power, and interaction within organizations is the knowledge that as employees we do have responsibilities to our employer. We also have rights that exist by the fact that we have entered into this arrangement with the organization and our employer. So, we have a certain right to safe environment, things like that. As likewise, we have a responsibility to meet our end of the contractual agreement and perform certain duties. The law protects us in many ways with certain rights like equal employment and that type of thing, wage and hour statutes. So we understand that these exist, but I think the law is a minimal ethical standard, and that we want to look beyond that as we engage with employees in these organizations. Many times it's about communicating expectations, and we codify these expectations often in handbooks and through actions. So rewards and discipline are powerful ways in which we can telegraph the expected behavior within an organization. What's rewarded and what's behaved will often drive what employees will do and how they will conduct themselves within the organization. I love this picture, and I throw it in occasionally because I think many of us have felt this way often at work. But remember that we as individuals also can expect a certain level of work environment, that both employers and employees have obligations. One of our obligations as an employee and as co-workers and even as managers is to work within teams. Teams, as we all know, are now an integral part of the workforce today. There are ethical aspects to our behavior within teams, and one that I just wanted to highlight was social loafing, which is a phenomenon that happens when people tend to work less when they join a group rather than they would on their own. And ways that we can support more ethical behavior as team members is to insist on certain things within the functioning of our teams. We need to be open and non-judgmental. We need to focus on problems and solving those problems rather than on the people issues. Honesty and transparency, again, are very important. But I think the bottom line is that, as you see up on the screen, if we foster respect, trust, and equality, we'll go a long way towards a more successful outcome within our teams. Things that can go wrong in organizations when people come together are these moral hazards. We are currently dialoguing on Blackboard on a case study involving groupthink, and I would put forward possibly even the Abilene paradox, in which people begin to oppose the majority opinion and action, but don't actually speak up. So this may have come into place. I'm not sure. I'll wait and see what the consensus is once we continue our dialogue. It's important, and this is part of the case study that we are looking at, that we know that there are these tendencies that humans have to continue forward in a less rational way. One is this concept of escalating commitment. You've heard the expression of throwing good money after bad. Escalating commitment is something that happens a lot in gambling, where it's hard to recognize that the money that's already spent is gone, so we continue to spend more in order. We're so committed that we feel like we can't pull back, instead of recognizing that we've already lost a certain level and we need to stop. Another illusion is the illusion of control, where we view that we have control over the situation, which is typically not the case, and again, moral exclusion. So these are things to take a look at in your textbook, and I look forward to reading more online and hearing from each of you. This module, we have some deliverables. One is a quiz. It's an open book quiz. It's not about memorization or regurgitating what you've read. It's about reinforcing what you have read and helping to cement those in your thinking as you move forward in discovering how you're going to implement ethical decision making in the future. And you're allowed 2 hours, which is excessive, but it's because it's a learning experience, not so much a test of memory. You're also going to be asked to submit a paper. You're given 3 choices. You do not do all 3. You would choose one choice of an activity and then dialogue on it in a fairly short paper. The instructions are listed under the module tab, so take a look at those, and if you have any questions, be sure and let me know. For those of you who are in the Portland area or in the Northeast, we've had a little bit of challenge with snow and ice, so I hope you're all staying warm no matter where you're located. And I look forward to reading more of your great work online and dialoguing. As always, don't hesitate to give me a call, set up a hangout or a G-chat if you have any questions. Thank you.